Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise to speak in this emergency debate to try to address some of the issues that I know many of my constituents are concerned about. And I think the goal of what we're trying to achieve with this debate on vaccines, vaccine distribution and procurement is answer some questions that many Canadians have. And I know I'm not the only member of Parliament here that has had numerous calls of frustration, anxiety, depression, and mistrust from our constituents because they just don't know who to believe anymore. And I'd like to back up just, if I may, for a brief bit to go back to where we got started with this. And the mixed messages and inconsistency from the very beginning from this Liberal government when it came to the COVID-19 pandemic. First, they dismantled Canada's early warning system, which would have allowed us to learn much more about this pandemic than we did before. We had members of our military warning the Liberal government about the impending impacts of the COVID pandemic, and the Liberal government ignored that. They were flip-flopping on travel restrictions. At first they said wearing masks wasn't important, wasn't necessary, didn't help. And now obviously we have a very different message. They even talked about accessing rapid and home-based testing. They compared rapid testing to selling snake oil to Canadians, when at the same time our allies, our partners, and Western democracies around the world were accessing that technology like home-based and rapid testing to keep their businesses open, to keep their schools open, keep their frontline healthcare workers safe, and allow their constituents to travel. That is where we started and where we got here, and why we are so adamant, Madam Speaker, to learn more about the vaccines and where we are. And I think that came to a head when we see that no vaccines are being delivered right now. Zero. And I saw a map on the Health Canada website that said, our vaccination distribution process is well underway. When you see in many jurisdictions around Canada, it's about 1%. 1% of Canadians have been vaccinated. Compare that to the United States, where they're well over 5%. I have constituents with family in Texas and Oklahoma who have said their family is going to be vaccinated by this spring, and we may not be vaccinated. Many of us may not have that first dose until next September. So that shows you the very stark difference between what is happening in Canada and what is happening in other parts of the world, and why we are so far behind, and why, as Conservatives, and I think as members of Parliament and elected officials, we are so concerned with this information, and certainly in many cases this lack of information. Now, we've come full circle on the vaccines, and I talked about some of the numbers that we have right now, but I'm going to talk a little bit about why I question why we're here and where we could have been if the Liberal government wasn't discriminating, and I don't know another better way to say that, Madam Speaker, why the Liberal government was discriminating against a made-in-Canada solution. Canadian vaccines that could have been developed and manufactured here in Canada. The Liberal government initially started with an agreement with CanSino, a Canada-Chinese partnership to develop and manufacture the vaccine. The Liberal government poured literally millions of dollars into that partnership at the beginning. Now, I would question, after everything we've been through with the Chinese Communist Party, why would we have ever put our trust in a partnership with the Chinese government? Why would that have been the one solution that the Liberal government had looked at? Now, not surprisingly, that partnership fell apart in the spring and early summer. As a result of that, the Liberal government had to scramble to find what other solutions were out there. And unfortunately, we don't know what agreements they signed. We don't know the details of what they relinquished or what we gave up, or what do we give up the licenses to manufacture the Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccines here in Canada? But what I find the most frustrating, Madam Speaker, is we didn't have to go through any of this. We could have had a made-in-Canada solution. We certainly saw today in the media, Providence Therapeutics in Calgary began its first clinical trials of a Canadian vaccine earlier this month. But what I found most frustrating, and I will tell you, Madam Speaker, when I was watching the representatives from Providence Therapeutics on the news this afternoon, I was angry. They were saying that they approached the Liberal government in March with the basis of a vaccine that's based on the same technology that is being used by Pfizer and AstraZeneca. And they were ready to begin their trials and hopefully production. They heard silence from this Liberal government. And now they have finally gone public with what the position they've put in. And Brad Sorensen, the CEO, said today, we have a Canada solution. We've sourced it, we've followed the rules, we've done what we're supposed to do, and we're not getting any engagement from this government. The company even offered to transfer its production and studies to the Montreal facility that the Liberal government had initially funded to increase capacity to manufacture that another vaccine. But again, radio silence from this Liberal government. Meanwhile, we have a Canadian technology that could have been in clinical trials and maybe in production. Another example, Soulstar Pharma out of Laval, Quebec, approached many members of Parliament, including Liberal members of Parliament, last March. I have the emails that I had back and forth with the Minister of Health and the Minister of Procurement. They have a very unique antiviral technology that they were asking for help from the Canadian government. Again, no response, silence. Frustrated, they wanted a made-in-Canada solution. Now, this antiviral technology requires no special storage. It is a powder inhaled, and unlike the vaccine, it actually attacks the virus in the body and kills that virus. So although the vaccine is important, the vaccine does not stop you from being infected or spreading the virus. The antiviral, on the other hand, kills the virus in your body. Again, a Canadian solution. I spoke to the CEO of the pharma company today, and he said, had we had the support from the Canadian government last spring, we would be in clinical trials now, ready to begin production. But what they ended up having to do, out of utter frustration of not getting any support or even any response from the Liberal government, is they applied to Operation Warp Speed in the United States. They immediately had a response. They are now being fully funded and are working with Pfizer and research companies in San Diego. Again, a Canadian solution that had no response from the Canadian government and had to go elsewhere. This is incredibly frustrating when we have a company like Soulstar Pharma, raised and born here in Canada, in Laval, Quebec, that had no response from the Canadian government. So that's two. We could have had a vaccine and an antiviral on hand right now if they had a response. We also have ClearMe rapid testing technology out of Calgary, 98% accurate, approved for use in the United States and the United Kingdom last spring. Still awaiting support and an answer and approval from Health Canada and this Liberal government. So why this discrimination against Canadian companies that want to have a Canadian solution and want to be there? And unfortunately, right now it seems like the Liberal government is treating this like a Seinfeld sketch. You know, anybody can order vaccines. Anybody can order a vaccine, but the most important thing, Madam Speaker, is actually having the vaccine. Having the vaccine that they can distribute it and deliver to Canadians. This isn't a joke. This is very serious. Imagine where we would be today if we had an antiviral, a vaccine, and rapid testing made here and manufactured in Canada. Where would our economy be? Where would the mental health of Canadians be? Would we be relying on global supply chains that we see the EU is now maybe blocking distribution of vaccines? Can we really rely on a vaccine manufactured in New Jersey that people in New Brunswick are going to get it before people in New York? That is what we are facing. But I want to offer a solution, Madam Speaker, as I conclude. It's not too late. These Canadian companies still want to work with Canadian organizations. For Soulstar, the Ontario government, the Quebec government has now reached out to help with their lab testing at Western University. The Liberal government needs to reach out to these Canadian companies who are ready to go and expedite their approval process and the clinical trials and be there to support these Canadian companies who desperately want to be part of a Canadian solution so we can get our economy back up and running and Canadians back to work. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.